whenever you're watching this, it's night for us right now. Welcome back to Wednesday Night Sessions. I am your host, Mitch Nobis. Welcome back to the regular viewers. We have a handful of local Farmington, Michigan regulars out there, and a big welcome to any new viewers. We have 5-ish seasons of this show out there on the YouTube channel for our local arts sponsor. KickstART Farmington sponsors this show. So head over to their YouTube page, kickstartfarmington.org, follow the links. You'll get there and you can catch up on previous episodes as well. I am especially excited about tonight's episode for various reasons. One of my favorite authors. Two, the idea to have Sandra on the show started 1 to 2 years ago, maybe. And then, life gets busy. It's taken us a while to get here. So I'm happy to finally have Sandra Newman joining us on Wednesday Night Sessions. Her most recent book is The Men. And like usual, I'm just going to toss it over to the guest to do a short reading. I'll disappear for a minute. And then when the reading is over, I'll pop back up for a couple of questions. So Sandra, thank you infinitely for joining us tonight. And the floor is yours.
Okay. Okay, thanks. I'm just going to do a very brief intro. So basically the premise of The Men is that all men, all boys, defined as anybody with a Y chromosome disappears in a single instant. And then the women have to sort things out and kind of restart society. And so the book is actually, ultimately, it's about those women who cannot move on with their lives, and they spend the entire book trying to find the people they've lost. And that is the book. So I'm just going to read the first few pages where this actually happens. So when the men disappeared, it felt like nothing. I was camping in the mountains of Northern California with my husband and my son. It was dusk and the sky was all one color, grayish violet, silken, dim. The lime green leaves of the alder above me were trembling and luminous, brighter than the sky. In the tent, my husband, Leo, was reading on an iPad and letting our 5-year-old, Benjamin, who had night terrors, fall asleep against him. Through the tent's mesh window, I could make out the iPad's light. I was lying in a hammock, putting off joining them. It was August, hot even up here in the mountains, and I had an idea about watching the stars come out and feeling wild and solitary, bound to no one. I wanted to indulge my fantasies of escape, of being a prima ballerina in Japan, or sailing solo around the world, fantasies in which I'd never married and had my whole life free. Still, I felt my husband and son there and loved that they were there. I was in love with them. I didn't want to be single and childless. I wanted to fantasize about it with them there. I wasn't worried by their long silence. There had been times I was frightened in the world, bad times. This was not a bad time, and I was happy. At 7:14, an intense nothing happened, an elation that wasn't of the nerves or the brain. I would later recall it as being like drugs. When it passed, I felt Leo and Benjamin were gone, but quickly dismissed the idea as foolish. Mood swings were normal for me and often accompanied by bizarre ideas. I looked to the tent and saw the tablet's light, a vivified spot. I didn't call out. I didn't want to wake Benjamin. I went back to my thoughts. At about 8 o'clock, I fell asleep. Down the mountain, in the world of people, women were already calling the police. They were running through their houses, screaming names. They were pounding on neighbors' doors for help and finding their neighbors running through their houses, screaming names. They were driving to police stations and discovering them lit and empty with the doors left open. Small aircraft were falling out of the sky. I went to sleep on the mountain, while the world fell apart. I slept right through till sunrise. Their living voices, rough and deep. The sound of a man in another part of the house. Boys hanging from branches like monkeys, hooting and kicking out at each other. How 3 boys could sound like 10. Drumming on a table, whistling, masculine, unself-conscious noise. Gone. Too few women on this committee. Another board of directors with no women. Men making decisions about women's bodies. Gentlemen's clubs, men's rights, women's magazines, feminism. Gone. Watching a boyfriend play computer games. Laughing at a man's story, then another man's story. Bracing yourself when he shows you something he made. The relief when it's not bad. The girl act, putting on a little girl voice, wearing flat shoes to make sure he's taller. The big hand on your shoulder, him telling you it's going to be okay. You're beautiful, said with that authority. Letting him take over, letting him drive, letting him decide. Him carrying you to bed. The rush of being sexually helpless before it, being an object of desire for men. Gone. The suffocated feeling of being talked over. A man putting on a high voice to mock you. At a party, a man's eyes passing over you to find a younger woman. Him answering your question, but addressing it to her. 2 men talking for a young woman's benefit. She mutely attends as if judging a contest. You say something and all 3 wait impatiently for you to finish. No one hearing you because they don't want to look at you. Standing at a mirror in a public restroom and seeing what they see. Him getting scary, him punching the wall, keeping your head down and letting it pass, being ashamed you set him off, being proud you didn't. The moment you realize you're not in control, all the magical thinking falls away and you're a body being killed. Or just coming to a group of men at a street corner, them falling silent and staring as you pass, not at your face. Footsteps behind you in the dark, big hands on your throat, not being able to stop him. Gone. Your father, your brother, your friend, your son. Meeting your husband for the first time. For me, Leo. Actually, I'm going to stop there. And I just realized I usually like change the ending a little bit and then it makes a more natural ending, but I actually read it correctly this time. So it's not as effective, annoyingly.
I mean, I think it's very effective. I love the book. So, and I'm glad you read the intro because it packs in so much. You could read 100 essays about patriarchy, or you could just read the first, scene of your novel of the men, right? And it captures so much in such a short time frame. I mean, as we're having this conversation, there's lots of people out there debating, should we still have humanities in college? And like the short answer is obviously yes, of course. We need novels for a million reasons, and that's one. Like that's so much more effective than an essay, right? It gets the whole point across of what it feels like to go to a party as a woman, for one thing, right?
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, thank you for reading that. Yeah, I love the book. I should jump before I jump in. 2 things before I jump in. I said I was going to do this at the top. We were kind of laughing before I clicked record about how we're both feeling discombobulated, and I was kind of making a joke like, I think that's the theme of my entire little YouTube show here, because we usually record these things after I come rushing downstairs after putting a kid to bed. So I'm often very discombobulated, and thus forget my questions, right? So before I jump in, I should point out that I loved all three of your most three recent books. The Country of Ice Cream, Star, The Heavens, and The Men. But I actually haven't read your original story. So if my question kind of bypasses your first couple of books, my apologies. They are on my. I was actually talking to another guest on this that will be on this season about how like the to read pile. Like I haven't read most of these. There's a pile next to the bed. Like where do you even put them all? We've got to learn how to make furniture out of these things. There are so many. But I say that because my question is kind of what I have read of your work. It's also wildly unique, and I apologize. You probably get this question a lot. My first question on the show is usually something sort of craft oriented, and I'm especially curious. Like they're also the Country of Ice Cream Star. It's like a flash forward into the future where like only the youth are alive, like the disease has spread and people only live to a certain age. The Heavens, very time travel oriented, but with this kind of like historical implications. Like it's a lot on like the notion of you go back in time, you change one thing, and then the whole future changes, and that kind of bounces back and forth a few times. The Men, as you said, is there's no Y chromosomes left on the planet. So these are kind of so wildly unique story ideas. Long intro. The short question is, do you ever write just sort of a kind of standard snippet of life kind of story and then just stick it away in a drawer someplace? Like, do you have a sheaf of stories someplace that are kind of that sort of standard middle class life in America, or just human dramas? I mean, your stories are obviously human dramas, but they all have these really unique angles to them. So do you ever find yourself like just kind of working on a piece and it doesn't have that unique pizzazz, so it ends up shelved? Or I guess this is a long story short, this is just a question of how do you decide what to write about?
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, I've started writing short stories that are a bit more like that. And it's partly because I was curious about that, about what it would be like to write that kind of thing. And also because I begin to feel a certain kind of, I will feel, I'm the sort of person who looks for any excuse to feel inferior to other people. So of course I begin to feel that the kinds of novels that I write are indications of weakness and an inability to write the other kinds of novels, which clearly like indicate that a person is in some way more genuine or superior, or doesn't need these props to create a story. So I started writing short stories that are more like basic realist middle class life in America stories. And it's, I can't really say, like, I want to say what it's like so far, but so far I've only finished one of them. So I don't really know if what it will be like is writing one short story successfully and then failing to write any others. That could be what it's like, or it could be that, I don't know. I mean, I know you're not supposed to say that, but I find writing short stories so far after one triumphant short story is so much easier than writing a novel that it feels like a trick. But I mean, they're shorter. They're
Right,
just
yeah,
like
yes.
way shorter, and they're really simpler. They're not as complicated. You don't have to, like, if you change something at the end, you don't have to rewrite 200 pages.
Yeah.
So yeah, it feels so much easier, but we'll see what happens with short story number 2. I may be eating my words.
So is that a future project? Are you envisioning a collection, or just kind of fiddling with the format of a short story?
I'm just writing them to be published independently. I don't really think of it as really, when I do write a short story, like each of them is so different from the others that they don't feel as if they could fit in a book together. Actually, I'm very irresponsible in that way as a short story writer, because I don't feel responsible for it to be a book. It's all like whatever didn't fit in the book goes into the short stories. Like I'm talking about them in the plural because what I especially love to do is come up with an idea for a short story and stick it away and feel as if I've more or less half written it.
Yes, yes. I think that's kind of, I'm glad you said that, because I feel like that's kind of what's behind my original question. It's like I have a whole I'm a basketball guy, so I use basketball metaphors because that's how my brain works. And I have an entire Google Doc that I call the bench, and they're ideas that are like on the bench that like someday they'll get in the game in theory, but then I never have any writing time to actually flesh any of these things out, right? So um I'm glad that you said that, because short stories do kind of feel like you can get, like, the idea can drive it more than a novel. Like if a novel is driven by just like the birth of the idea, there's not enough there for 200 to 300 pages. Like it's got to be fleshed out so much more. But you really can write a great short story that is driven just by kind of the concept, so to speak, right? I mean, obviously you've got to flesh out your characters, and I'm by no means trying to belittle the craft of writing a short story. They're incredibly hard. I've gotten, I think, 2 published ever, right? Like it's incredibly difficult to do. But it does seem somehow like more bite-sized than a novel, you know?
Yeah, it feels like you can see the end of it,
Yeah.
even if the end doesn't come out well. And if it doesn't come out well, you can throw it away and you haven't wasted 2 years of your life. But you gotta love that about a short story. So
Yeah, I have bad news for you about how long it can take to write a novel when you're a K-12 teacher, though. 2 years. I am
oh yeah, yeah.
well beyond that
Right,
with my
right.
little.
Even saying that is almost a microaggression, like to people who have full-time jobs. I'm sorry.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, it's I mean, I've got people that know I'm working on this. It's sort of a running joke, because I'm a K-12 teacher, parent of young children. Life has a certain number of kind of regularly scheduled crucible elements to it. Like whenever I try to work on a long thing, it basically gets relegated to a week every summer. Like teachers have summers off, right? So basically, it's like when the kids actually are at basketball camp, I'll try to cram in like 2 hours of writing, in which the first day I have to like rewrite the whole thing to remember where I left off. That kind of
Right. Oh yeah.
constant recreation to remember where you left off. So, um, but that's neither here nor there. Second question on this show. Oh, and I also love that you thought that like you're not a great writer, so that's why you don't do standard middle class stuff. Like I'm calling BS on that, because you're a great writer. Second question is something that's usually kind of goofy in nature, and so a lot of the people I have on here I met on Twitter, and yours kind of the flip side. I actually had read your work, and then we had chatted on Twitter a little bit over the years. And now that Twitter's sort of fallen apart in many ways, I remember the other day, like, well, Sandra's going to be on the show. And I kind of had this aha. I'm like, oh my God, the raccoons. Like, I miss the raccoons on Twitter. So if you don't use Twitter often, and for whatever reason didn't follow Sandra when she was on, she will talk about the raccoons and their inappropriate place in the hierarchy of life on our planet. They deserve a higher esteem. And so my second question is often goofy, so I'm going to pitch a goofy raccoon question to you. You get to replace any one major public figure. Let's go with that. So a major public figure, could be political or otherwise, with one or more raccoons. Who are you going to replace?
So I'm not allowed to like replace them all with several raccoons each.
Yeah, it could be more than one raccoon. It could be
no, but I mean, could I replace like every major public figure with a raccoon, or maybe 3 raccoons each?
So instead of a Congress, we're like a monarchy of one raccoon kind of thing.
Well, I was thinking of, instead of Congress, a very large population of feral raccoons, added to what is no doubt an already thriving population of, well, actually, I don't think a raccoon can be feral unless it's already been a pet. So wild raccoons.
Yeah, wild raccoons. Okay, so your short answer is yes, that's allowed.
Yeah, there's no limit to the number of I mean, I would replace myself with a raccoon in a heartbeat. So
wouldn't we all? Well, no, I mean, my neighbor has raccoons under his deck, so he would not. But many of us would gladly replace ourselves with.
Yeah, some people are not fans of the raccoon, but
yeah, unfortunately, no. They are fascinating. Okay, so I kind of diverted you. So your answer was just basically everybody. You just want to replace everybody with raccoons.
Yeah. Like I don't, like actually since being off Twitter, my personal hatred for individual public figures has declined dramatically. So, but my love of raccoons is not. It's really, it's been a nice thing about not being on Twitter.
That's a strong vote for quitting Twitter right there. I'm filled with love for people and raccoons.
Yeah, something like that.
And
I do have like, if we've got one more minute.
Oh yeah, of course.
A raccoon related fact. One thing that I always think about in relation to raccoons, whenever I say anything about raccoons in public, is a book that I once read, which I think had a deep effect on me. I was like a teenager, and it's a science fiction novel in which a man, I don't know, he gets hit on the head and is transported into the future. I think it's that cheesy, but in the future, 1,000 years in the future, Earth is ruled by a civilization of hyper-intelligent raccoons who communicate in sign language, and they have this raccoon civilization. And the book is called The Architect of Sleep, and it's a really good book. It's it doesn't sound that promising, even if you love raccoons, but it actually is really great. And the guy who wrote it, however, like is very embittered about that novel because it was discovered by furries.
Oh.
And his life was made a misery by the furries ever after, and he like gave up writing. And if you look at it up, you can find like statements by him about furries where he's just like incandescent with hatred.
Oh, that is like one of the most, the whole like once you write it and it's out in the world, it's sort of like it becomes its own entity, and you can no longer control the art. That's a top 10 example of that.
Yeah, that's what his life was about for years after writing that book.
Which like if furriness is your thing, would be like a dream come true, but if it's not, that would be.
Yeah, he was misunderstood. Like they thought that he was one of them. I think maybe the guy did have the character did have a romance with the raccoon. I don't remember actually, but maybe that was the source of the furry fascination. But anyway.
Fascinating. Well, yeah. So you write the thing, you put it out in the world, and you can no longer control any aspect of it. It becomes its own entity. See exhibit, the sentient squirrel. Yeah. Squirrels are sentient, but you get my point.
Yeah, we assume. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. There's something there. There's some spark there.
Okay.
All right. Sandra, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Viewers, run out and grab her novels. They are fantastic, and keep an eye out for some short stories also, which I'm very excited to hear about.
Okay. Thanks, Mitch. Thanks a lot.
All right. Viewers, we'll see you next time. Take care.